This meeting is being recorded.
If everyone would go ahead and hit continue on that screenshot there, and that'll get us going. But certainly want to welcome everyone to tonight, which is the third installment of our forage webinar series. The first two that we had one in January, one in February. The January meeting was dealing with high fertilizer prices with Dr. John Grove at the University of Kentucky. And then our February 8th meeting was the role of legumes in forage production. We had UT Extension Forage Specialist, Dr. Gary Bates, on for that program. And tonight's our third installment, but hey, we got lots of things to look forward to coming up. If you've not seen this schedule of programs and program ideas that we've got here, man, you need to take a look at it, because in April, we're talking about summer forages with R.L. Dalrymple and Dr. Dillard from Auburn University. And then in May, we're actually going to do a two-part on hay production, one in May and one in June. The May part is getting the most out of your crop with Dr. Dennis Hancock. And then in June, baling and storage. Talk a little bit about haylage as well with Dr. Lisa Baxter, University of Georgia. And then July 12th, native warm season grasses for forage production with Dr. Pat Kaiser here at UT. And then August, establish and renovation of cool season forages with Dr. Tutch of the University of Kentucky. And then we got the big in-person grazing summit, which is actually, we said that was actually going to be at Tennessee Tech, but it's actually going to be on a farm here in White County. And then in November, we got beef cattle feeding strategies with the University of Missouri forage team there. So we got a good lineup, and I know our speaker tonight, he comes highly recommended, and it's Dr. John Bryd. He's going to be talking about controlling weeds in pasture and hay. He's the extension weed guru specialist or Mississippi State University, and we're certainly appreciative of having him on here. But any of these that you miss, if you miss one of these webinars and you want to go back and watch that thing, you can find those at the UT Extension Smith County YouTube page. And we've got each of those on there, so you can go back in and just watch those at your convenience and stuff. Some good information. If nobody has any questions or comments, I'll remind you that on the bottom of your screen, you've got a little toolbar on the bottom. If you have any questions that you're thinking of through the program, please just type those in the chat. Once you type those in, it'll have a little arrow looking thing. You click that and it'll send it right to us, and we'll be able to respond to those. We'll just try to hold some of those questions toward the end if we could. But Dr. Bryd, if you're good to go, we just turn it over to you, sir.
All right. Now remind me, I hit share screen before I hit my PowerPoint, or PowerPoint first?
Share screen, and then you can open up your PowerPoint.
All right. So basically what I have modified just a little bit, but to give in this presentation tonight is the same set of slides that I'm using going around and doing county meetings here in Mississippi. And so I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you a little bit tonight about some of the issues that we're dealing with in forage production systems. I'm going to remind you that weed control has always been expensive, but with what I'm hearing from producers right now, the price of not only fertilizer, but herbicides have gone through the roof too. So be aware that these herbicides are going to cost you a lot more this year than you paid for those same products if you bought them last year. So the expenses have gone up significantly this year, and it's imperative that we use those products in a way that we can maximize the performance of the herbicides. I'll remind you too that weed control research is expensive, and I'll show a little bit more about the expense associated with getting some of these products on the shelf so that you can buy them and apply those in your livestock production systems and forage systems. The ones I'm going to concentrate on and focus on tonight are these 4 new products. Now, three of these have hit the market already. One we're still waiting, and I've not heard yet an update from Corteva on when they're going to get the Proclova product in the marketplace. But these other products are the ones that I'm going to highlight in my overview tonight. I did borrow this slide from a friend of mine who is with a chemical company. They do not make a lot of products that go specifically into the pasture and hay market, being more focused in traditional row crop agriculture systems. But he shared this slide with me several years ago. It's been about 5 or 6 years ago, actually. But the thing that I want to point out here, because people often ask, why are these herbicides so expensive? And so this slide kind of summarizes that information. If you look down there in the bottom center of the slide, 5 to 6 years ago, it was costing these companies right at $286 million to go through all the testing that EPA requires to make sure these products are safe to you as the applicator, as well as to the environment before it gets put on the shelf. They're adding, they being EPA, are adding even more studies that companies are going to have to complete to ensure these products are safe, to get them on the market in the future, or to re-register products that are already being sold in these markets. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go through the presentation. So in excess, I did hear a Corteva rep use the figure late last year, back in November, $310 million now is the cost that that their company is saying to get a product through these development processes and into the market. I also want to point out over on the left-hand side of the slide, you see a timeline with an 8 to 12 year investment period in getting these herbicides and getting these pesticides into the marketplace. I'll remind you that the patent life starts the day the bench chemist discovers this molecule and gets it registered. So from that point, he's got 17 years that company has exclusive marketing rights for that compound before the generic companies can get into the marketing game and for you as a producer, lower those costs, but it also cuts into the recovery time that these companies have to recoup that huge investment they've made in getting that product in the market. So they've got basically 5 to 9 years that they can recoup that. Let's just round it off between 286 and 310 and say $300 million. They've got 5 to 9 years that they can recoup that investment. And that's why some of these products have been priced the way they have been. So I know this is not a brand new registration. You've probably been using it and seen it on the market shelf for a couple of years, but it is a new product, what I consider still a relatively new product from Corteva, the Duracor herbicide that is basically a blend of 2 active ingredients, aminopyrrolid, which is in the old Milestone and Gray Zone Next materials that we've had in the forage market for some time, and they did add low pyroxene, which is a compound they've got registered now and had registered for several years in rice under the trade name of Loyant. You see the application rates there for Duracor at 12 to 20 fluid ounces per acre, with a maximum of 20 ounces per acre per year, and not more than 2 applications per calendar year. You do have a hay harvest restriction if you choose to apply Duracor in your hay field. You're not supposed to cut hay less than 14 days after treatment. And I do think that has more to do with giving those plants adequate time to die before you run the disc mower across the field or run your conditioner across the field and take that hay off. The DuraCore product does list, the herbicide label does list more than 140 weeds on the label that control. Most of these are annuals and biennials, but there are some that I consider soft perennials, those perennials that are don't develop a lot of woody tissue, if you will. They're not herbaceous. They're more herbaceous perennials than they are woody perennials. And so it does have activity on a number of perennial weeds. One of the ones that we see that DuraCore misses in Mississippi is dog fennel, and I must admit I don't know the distribution of dog fennel or summer cedar, as some of our producers call it, in the volunteer state, but it is a significant problem in our state, in Mississippi, the further south you go. And so DuraCore, like Grazone Next, is going to require a tank mix partner if you want to control the perennial dog fennel. You're going to have to add something to the tank. But a trade-off of that is that it does have better activity on some other, and again, these are, all three of these plants actually fit into that, what I consider soft perennial weed. Does have good activity on the variety of plantains that we often see both in pastures and hay fields, as well as the Brazilian vervain that has the square stem and gets up about chest high.
Dr. Bryd?
Yes, sir.
I would point out, you'd ask about dog fennel and stuff. Didn't know how it was. Hey, we do have dog fennel in our area here. We've got a whole lot more problems from the plantains, for sure.
Yeah,
so,
the plantains have been, I mean, those are pretty widely distributed, I know, throughout the eastern part of the U.S. So it is goes all up into the New England states. So I know that one's a big problem.
So what would be your recommended tank mix partner there if you're trying to target dog fennel?
Well, for us, I'm still a big fan of putting some dicamba in the tank, adding some dicamba, going with a Weed Master product, or we see good activity from the old Grazone P plus D, and I don't know if y'all have a label for Grazone P plus D in Tennessee, but P plus D does a great job on dog fennel, where Grazone Next and DuraCore just miss it.
We do have Grazone P plus D in certain counties.
Okay, so that would be an alternative treatment there. One of the things that I understand Corteva is pushing with DuraCore is impregnating the herbicide onto dry fertilizer and basically making a weed and feed application with this product. I know some producers that have used this in livestock systems and have not been really excited about the levels of control. Now, I've seen some of the work that's been done in turf, and I know there are a gazillion products on the big box store shelves that are weed and feed blends for homeowner use. You've got a much more controlled environment there that you can apply the material and in many cases water it in immediately, or if it's something like DuraCore, you would need to water the grass or apply this impregnated fertilizer after a rain so that you've got some water droplets on the leaf to help solubilize that herbicide so that it gets moved into the plant. I think a real tricky scenario to get good activity out of a phenoxy type herbicide or growth regulator type herbicide in a livestock production system, because I just don't know that many producers that have that kind of irrigation capacity. One of the things that we are seeing some restrictions on this Duracor label in terms of moving hay off the farm if that hay has been treated with Duracor. And I've got these highlighted here. It can't be moved off the farm less than 18 months after the application. And part of the reason that we're seeing this is apparently there have been, and I've seen cases here in Mississippi where perhaps hay that had been treated with some of these residual herbicides ends up as a composting material in gardens, and there have been a number of cases apparently where significant losses have occurred because of the residual component, residual activity from aminopyrrolid from both Duracor and Milestone and Gray Zone Next. So EPA has forced Corteva to add these restrictions to the label that hay can't be moved off the farm less than 18 months unless you have a supplemental label. I've got a copy of that supplemental label in this slide, and I can assure you that Tennessee is included in the list of states where the hay can be sold off the farm less than 18 months. And so again, I would encourage you, if you choose to buy this material, you are a hay producer that chooses to use Duracor, make sure that you get a copy of that supplemental label along with the label that's attached to the Duracor containers. This label does expire November 22nd of this year. I don't yet know what Corteva's plans are. I suspect there's lots of discussion going back and forth with the EPA on can this be shortened or restricted or what's going to end up happening here. But this is something that you need to be aware of. As I mentioned, this is something that EPA has imposed.
So just to be clear on that previous slide that you had on there, Tennessee is listed in that supplemental label.
Yes. Can you see my arrow on the screen?
I do. And so that means that producers that use Duracor then can sell hay and it be moved off the farm based on the supplemental label?
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct. And this involves more than just aminopyrrolid from a regulatory perspective with EPA. Of course, we don't use chlorpyrrolid in pastures. We do use aminopyrrolid. We do use picloram. And then the two less persistent herbicides in this group, triclopyr, which we use as remedy, and fluroxypyr, which is a component of again, several of the products that Corteva has in the market. One of the things that really strikes me about what EPA is attempting to do, if you read right here in the center of the slide, for pasture and turf sites, applicators must notify landowner operators of compost restrictions and keep records of those notifications for 2 years. And I don't know yet exactly how this is going to work out. I suspect the details of all this have not been completely settled between EPA and Corteva. But this is something that you need to be aware of if this label is changed and that becomes a requirement as time moves forward.
Dr. Bird, I've got something showed up on my screen here that said Will had raised his hand. Will, did you have a specific question?
Ask him to unmute.
All right. I guess not. We'll continue. I'm sorry.
Well, we'll get it at the end if nothing else. One of the things that I've seen too on the DuraCore label that we've not seen until now has been fairly specific instructions that Corteva has put on the label regarding reseeding following an application. If you spend much time reading herbicide labels, I certainly spend quite a bit of time reading them. But in the past, the labels have used very vague instructions like consult your local extension agent or consult your local extension specialist. And that puts a tremendous burden on our extension personnel to know what kind of rate the grower applied, to know how much rain has occurred between the application and when they're going to plant, etc. And so one of the things that Corteva has added is much more specific instructions. If you're planting ryegrass or fescue, you need to wait 15 days between an application of 12 ounces per acre and any reseeding. If you're using any of these warm season grasses that I've got highlighted in yellow, then you need to extend that interval from 15 to 30 days if you're using the low end of that application rate at 12 ounces. And then, of course, any other grasses that you might choose to put in the system, or if your rate is higher than 12 ounces per acre, then you need to wait at least 45 days after the treatment.
Well, I hope everybody's listening. I hope everybody's listening to that now, because that's a question we get a lot there. How can I reseed after I apply that chemical? And he just said fescue, ryegrass, 15 days. Some of those summers like crabgrass, pearl millet, sorghum sudan, and teff, 30 days. So,
and that's only if they're using the low rate, Scott. So if they're using any rate higher than 12 ounces, then those intervals are even longer. Now, if we start talking about legumes and putting legumes in the system, then the dynamics change quite substantially, and the label says you need to do a field bioassay. And it gives you instructions on how to do the bioassay. But the thing that I think growers often forget
that a lot of people, or that ain't Clive, but a lot of people, most people spray with grape.
The what now? So what most people forget to do is that to do a bioassay correctly, according to the label, you're supposed to wait 1 year after you've applied the herbicide before you do the bioassay. And so just making you aware of the information that they have added to the DuraCore label. I had put this slide in here before I was able to get in touch with J.C. May down in Alabama, who told me that both DuraCore and the next product that I'll be talking about have been registered to be sold in the state of Mississippi. Our Department of Agriculture uses this Kelly product system, and I can go online, click on Mississippi, and find any product that's registered to be sold. Any pesticide that's registered to be sold in the state. Tennessee Department of Ag is not using this system, so I was not able to use that. But she did tell me that Mesaview, which is Corteva's other new product, has also been registered to be sold in Tennessee. Mesaview is a 3-way blend of aminopyrrolid that's in the DuraCore, that's in the Grazon Next, Picloram that's in good old Grazon P plus D, and fluroxypyr. They don't sell fluroxypyr as a standalone product in the forage market. It is registered to be used in the non-crop market as Vista, and Mesaview can be applied at 12 to 36 ounces per acre. Now, based on some of the research plots that we've had in Mississippi, in my opinion, Mesaview is a much better and a much more active product if you're targeting what I consider the more woody perennial plants, woody perennial weeds that you might have in a pasture. Things like multiflora rose that just look really, really effective on the roses and some of the vines, perennial vines that we often see in these areas. I will remind you, don't apply it in the root zone of desirable trees. And remember that root zone extends well beyond. It's actually 2 times the drip layer. So when you look at a tree and you see how far the limbs extend from the main trunk, stay outside that distance, 2 times that distance if you don't want root uptake, because you've got at least 2 molecules in this blend, both aminopyrrolid and picloram, that are soil active, can be taken up by the roots once they get into the soil. And then of course you will see and can see injury, or I have seen some fields where growers were insisted on not only applying the herbicide, but then circling the tree to try to spray weeds up under the tree, and a lot of those trees end up dying. There are restrictions on this label and additional guidance, if you will, on how soon Mesaview can be applied in forage systems. Reseeded grasses don't treat less than 3 weeks after. That should be after planting. What apply to newly seeded grasses? Don't apply to newly seeded grasses before they have tillered, or Bermuda grass has stolons that are 6 inches long. So in newly sprigged hayfields, for example, you need to get 6 inches of growth on those stolons before you make a Mesaview application. You do have a restriction for harvesting hay, and don't harvest hay 7 days after treatment if it's going for meat animals, 14 days after treatment if that hay will be fed to lactating dairy animals, or lactating dairy animals are grazed on those treated sites. And then you also need to bioassay that site, those treated sites, before any legumes are added back to that system as a forage component. Same restriction here in terms of hay movement with Mesaview. I've not been able to find a supplemental label that would allow that interval to be shortened with this product. And again, another example where they have given more specific instructions on reseeding, 3 weeks after application. If the Mesaview is applied before the grass is treated, and then how long to wait after those grasses have been planted or sprigged before the Mesaview can be applied, because you do need to give those seedling forages an opportunity to get established before the Mesaview is applied. Bayer's brought one new product to the market. We've had it, I guess, for one use season now. Resilon is the brand name of that product, and they've got it labeled at rates of 3 to 5 fluid ounces per acre. Primarily to control annual grasses, but there are a number of broadleaf plants on the label. Resilon is strictly pre-emergence. It has no post-emergence activity. Because of that, remember that it needs to be applied, and you need to get rainfall or if you have capacity to irrigate, move that herbicide into that seed germination zone before those seeds ever start to absorb water for germination to start, if you want to get optimum activity from this crop. You can make sequential applications, but don't make those less than 60 days between treatments. It does control, as I mentioned, a number of grasses and broadleaf weeds and sedges. I've highlighted here the annual foxtails are on the Resilon label, but the one that dominates forage systems in Mississippi is not an annual foxtail. It's a perennial, not root foxtail. And I know from previous conversations I've had with Dr. Rhodes, I know that not root foxtail, the perennial, I don't know exactly how widespread it is in Tennessee, but I know there are a number of producers that do have challenges with not root foxtail on a regular basis. The other thing I want to mention about pigweeds, there are a couple of pigweeds on the Resilon, pig types of pigweed on the Resilon label. Red root pigweed, for example, is on the label. Spiny amaranth, the one that I see most common in pastures, is not on the Resilon label. And so I specifically challenged the Bayer development rep, well, why do you have these pigweeds on the label and don't have spiny amaranth? And basically his response to me was, we see initial control of spiny amaranth with Resilon, and then as time progresses, control tends to fail. So I would suspect that would be the case with most all pigweeds, but we do know that spiny amaranth germinates over a longer, perhaps longer period of time than some of these other pigweeds, and maybe that's at least part of the reason that they didn't include it. I'm going to change gears just a little bit and talk a little bit about, I think, some issues that are going to affect you as cattle producers from a herbicide, from a weed control perspective. Really, it's going to affect all of agriculture, I think, as time progresses, because I put some screenshots and screen snips up on this image that I am relatively certain most of you have probably seen, either through social media, or you watch the Outdoor Channel, or you watch much television. You've probably seen some of these advertisements. I consider lawyers trolling for participants in some of their lawsuits. And some of you may use paraquat in your hayfield situations to burn down some of that winter vegetation that may be out there, so that you get a relatively clean cutting on that first hay cut. And so if you are a paraquat user, be aware that there is some additional training requirement now to be able to purchase and apply paraquat. I've got highlighted on this is on EPA's website, but I've got right here in the center of the slide, it redirects you to a link, which I'll get to in a minute. But at first, I want to point out at least part of the reason I have been told by the paraquat manufacturers that EPA has implemented this change. There have been some deaths that have been directly associated with paraquat consumption, and that typically has happened not inside the U.S. but in underdeveloped countries. 17 deaths that have occurred since 2000. I've not been able to get any information directly from them about the deal with Parkinson's disease, but I see that's one of the main ones that some of the lawyers are advertising. That has resulted in EPA forcing them to make a number of changes to the Remoxone labels, Remoxone and other paraquat product labels. Of course, you can't apply it with a handgun or a backpack. You have to be in an enclosed cab. If the area has been treated in a 24-hour period, if it's less than, greater than 80 acres, et cetera. Some of this may or may not apply from that perspective, but the thing that I wanted to point out, the previous slide, EPA slide, redirects you to this Extension Foundation campus. You can see over on the left here, paraquat. And if you click on that link, then you go through probably about maybe an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes worth of training that you are then tested on at the end of that viewing time, and you will be issued by that whoever is handling that for EPA a certificate that you have completed this course and that you can now purchase and use paraquat. And of course, that certificate is good for 3 years, and then you'll have to go through the training period once again. Well, paraquat's not the only one, and I know you've seen you're all well aware of what happened with Roundup and now paraquat, and then lo and behold, 2 weeks ago I see this on Facebook, not Facebook, but when I pull up Google on my computer, this is one of the news blurbs that's popping up. I think the environmentalists are really going after some of these herbicides and some of the things that they're putting out on social media now. And so they're coming after another one that's long been a staple in the forage weed control arena, 2,4-D, and who knows where that's going to end up going with. I think part of this is coming from what I'm going to show you now, and this was an email that I received just last week. EPA is looking for some individuals that would be interested in being fellows in a program that they're developing, and I know that that's a little bit hard to read, so I highlighted the way they described EPA's new administrator under the Biden-Harris administration as an individual that has prioritized environmental justice. And so some of the things that I'm going to talk about, that I have been talking about with paraquat, some of the things that I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes, I think pertain more to environmental justice than anything else. This is one of the things that EPA has always, in the past, when they registered a new compound, or when pesticides went through the 15-year review. Every 15 years, they have to go through re-review and make sure they still meet the standards that EPA has enacted since those compounds were first registered. They have always used this practice when they evaluated those materials. Were they used in accordance with widespread, commonly recognized practices as they relate to applications? Well, one of the things that we're going to see going forward is now this publication that the National Academy of Sciences produced, assessing risk to endangered and threatened species from pesticides, which you can see the internet address up there at the top. You can buy your own copy, or you can download it for free. they're going to make a number of changes to the registration and re-registration process as it pertains to evaluating the impact on threatened and endangered species. The Weed Science Society of America had a seminar back in January and got people that both work with EPA, with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, National Marine Fisheries Service, and these other federal agencies that deal with threatened and endangered species, U.S. Forest Service, etc., to go through some of the reasoning why they are making these changes to the process that EPA requires these companies to do to justify the lack of impact on these threatened and endangered species. And so they've implemented, or they've issued a new book, if you will, or guidelines on how these will be evaluated. And the main thing that concerns me is that the models that EPA will use from this point forward is that they look at the label and make the assumption that that product is applied at the maximum rate allowed by the label, the maximum number of times per year the label allows, and that every acre of that site gets treated every single year. And so in my opinion, we all know that all forage systems don't get sprayed with Duracor at the maximum use rate every single year. And so I personally think this is an erroneous model that EPA is implementing in evaluating the impact on threatened and endangered species. And apparently, I'm not the only one that's made that assumption. The president of the Texas Farm Bureau put on their social media that EPA is now making the assumption that every acre of soybeans, not just in Texas, but all in the entire United States, gets treated with the maximum rate of glyphosate on every acre every year, and we know that that's not true. So EPA has already started to use this process to evaluate some products, like some of the triazines you see listed here. Of course, we don't use the triazine in forage systems, but atrazine and simazine, for example, are predicted to affect 54 and 53% of all threatened and endangered species and 40% of critical habitats for those species. Glyphosate applied on roadsides and utility rights-of-way, they have made the assumption, or their model predicts that glyphosate will adversely affect 93% of all threatened and endangered species and 96% of the habitat of those threatened and endangered species. And I know for a fact, I do enough work with the Department of Transportation and with utility companies in Mississippi to know that glyphosate is not applied to those areas every single year, and certainly not at those rates. The other question in my mind as a scientist is how accurate are the data being used to determine what's threatened and what's endangered. Here's an example of a fish that was thought to be extinct in a river in Ohio, actually isn't extinct. And so are there greater numbers of some of these organisms that are thought to be threatened and endangered than is actually the case? And in fact, there may be some organisms out there that we as humans may actually be better off that they're not here now, if we had things like these eagles that actually hunted human beings. So enough about that, and we'll change gears again. You all know that in order to use herbicides effectively, you've got to identify the plant, you've got to select the right product, you've got to calibrate your equipment. I'm sure that you've got recommendations on selecting those products from the weed control publications produced by the University of Tennessee. But I'll remind you that you do need to calibrate your equipment, whether you're using boomed equipment, whether you're using boomless systems. Both of these can be used quite effectively in pastures, but something that I did last summer that I'm going to talk about has caused me to rethink a little bit about calibrating these boomless sprayers, because what we typically tell producers is determine the width, drive the distance based on our tables in our weed control books, based on that width, and then catch the output from that sprayer for that length of time and measure it in pints, and you've got your gallons per acre application rate. So it does need to be done every year, maybe multiple times a year, certainly won't hurt. One of the things that I have started doing with one of my colleagues in ag engineering is evaluating the effectiveness of some of these guidance systems for making herbicide applications in pastures, and seeing if we can eliminate some of the skips that we often see from those applications. Can we make more precise applications with this type of technology so that we can minimize the potential for damaging clover as we go through the weed control process? I mentioned that I ran into an issue with my spray equipment this summer, and I'm going to show you that we went out on some dry gravel and measured a boom swath width of 38 feet. I went into a section of my pasture, backed it off just a little bit, my guidance system, put in 35 feet, sprayed across that smart weed that was in that section of the pasture, and lo and behold, 10 days later, this is what it looked like. I had streaks all across the pasture that I had missed with my application. And I actually measured the width of those streaks and found out that my effective spray swath was only 26 feet compared to what appeared to be my effective swath width with the tractor sitting still at 38 feet. So it's caused me to rethink the way that we're going to approach some of our calibration. And as again, we're working with a guy in ag engineering, evaluating several of these systems, and I've got a graduate student that's looking at application and deposition from a number of these boomless type spray tips. Some of you may be using this type equipment, sprayer in the back of an ATV, or on a four-wheeler. Some of you may be using a backpack sprayer to make some of these applications. In our weed control recommendations, we do include percent solutions. If you're using that type material, most of our forage herbicide labels do have guidance for percent solutions to mix if you're just using a backpack type sprayer. And so we do include those rates in our weed control publications. I'll remind you the primary causes of off-target movement or drift are the four things, the 4 bullet points you see on this slide: droplet size, how far that droplet has to fall before it hits the leaf of that weed, and of course the wind speed and wind direction. Most herbicide labels have been written by lawyers that word these things extremely vague so that it throws the liability back on you as the applicator to know that most of these products know the weather conditions when you're making the application, and understand that if the wind gets above 10 miles per hour, you're not supposed to make those applications. I'll remind you too that one of the greatest contributors to off-target movement is temperature inversion, oftentimes late in the day or early in the morning. If you live close to a dirt road that's dry enough for dust to move or smoke, you can often see when these temperature inversions occur. And under these conditions, when the air, as you move away from the Earth's surface, is warm to a point, and then it gets cooler. Under normal conditions, the further away from the Earth's surface you move, the cooler the air gets. But when these inversions occur, the air gets cooler and then it hits a hot layer up above, and fog, smoke, dust, oftentimes these can be visible early in the morning or they can be visible late at night. And under these conditions, those small droplets have a tendency to move horizontally rather than fall toward the earth. Now, I wanted to mention the product, the other new product that Corteva is bringing to the market, because I often get lots of questions about weed control in forage systems where clover is a component. And we've known for a number of years that white clover does have moderate tolerance, if you will, to 2,4-D. I typically don't like to use more than a quart per acre, and you will bang it up and bruise it a little bit. But if it's a stand of established perennial white clover, it will tolerate a quart per acre of 2,4-D. And again, part of the reason that those more precise herbicide applications are important. Of course, we've evaluated 2,4-D at lower rates. We've looked at pursuit and some other things as a component to improve control. Pursuit does have a label to use in both alfalfa and clover, and it is absolutely safe on a wide variety of annual and perennial clovers. And this slide just shows you an application of a combination of 4 ounces of Pursuit and a pound of 2,4-D. The downside of using Pursuit, it will cause some growth suppression on fescue. It will cause some growth suppression on ryegrass, but it is and there are some winter weeds that it is not active on, like the thistles, but it is a safe product to use on clover. Corteva is bringing a new product. We got to look at it last year for the first time. It's a blend of the choline form of 2,4-D, which is their low drift, no drift 2,4-D, and fluoroxyphene benzyl, which is one of the same active ingredients that's in Duracor. Like I said, we got to look at some plots last year for the first time with this product, and here's some of the data. Now the slide, the bars over on the left are the protocol that Corteva wanted us to look at. What I've got labeled as Clover Concept applied at 24 ounces and 32 ounces, with the first set of bars and third set of bars would be what they are targeting as their X rate. We had another blend of these two materials that they also wanted us to evaluate at some different rates. And what you're seeing here with the green bar is the amount of clover injury that we saw visually at 2 weeks after application, and then the yellow bar represents the clover injury at 8 weeks after application. I told my students there were a few other things I wanted to add to the treatment protocol, and so we did look at the 2,4-D choline at 24 ounces. We also put some 2,4-D LV4 out at 24 ounces per acre. And so you see the differences in clover injury between the 2,4-D choline and 2,4-D LV ester. We also had Pursuit in there at 6 ounces, and you can see that it caused the it caused the least amount of clover injury of all the herbicides that we looked at. And so I'm not sure that, at least in white clover systems, and by the way, I understand from Corteva that they're not going to label that product and use on anything except white clover. I'm not really excited about it at this point in time. There was a poster at the Southern Weed Science Society meeting back in January. One of my colleagues, graduate students from Virginia Tech, and they had basically looked at the same thing, and you can see in this center graph, they've got an untreated, they've got Proclova at two different rates there. And again, they compared that to straight old 2,4-D at both a low and high rate. And you're looking at clover biomass in this case now, not injury. So the higher the bars, the more clover you have in the system. So they're also seeing that straight 2,4-D caused less injury to clover than the Proclova product. I wanted to mention hack and squirt applications for those of you that may be trying to control individual woody plants. You can control a lot of woody vegetation. Takes some time to do it, but it's a very effective application method. One of the things that I've come up with is how do you carry the product around and apply it accurately? And the system that I settled on is using something like a hydration backpack with a veterinary medicine dose gun. And you can pick up these Primatech. You may pick up a different brand close to you, but they're adjustable between 1 and 2 mils per pull of the handle. And so you're making very accurate, applying very accurate amounts into that incision. We've developed a fact sheet here at Mississippi State that has the herbicides that are labeled for application in these situations, the rates of application, and this is undiluted herbicide, or it may be diluted in diesel fuel. One of the things I like about this system is if you use the undiluted product, then it's basically like storing the material in the jug, and we have stored a number of these products in the reservoir of these hydration backpacks for 2 years. We had 2 products, one being the acid form of triclopyr, one being the ester form of triclopyr that did start leaking from the reservoir after 2 years, but a lot of these other products held up quite well. I see that I'm out of time. I'm not out of slides, but I'm out of time, Scott, so I'll stop here and we'll take some questions.
All right, thank you, sir. Certainly, you mentioned a couple of new products there that kind of unfamiliar to some of us, Mesaview and Resilon. I don't know if our local, if we've got that available here locally or not, but if not, is that something that we would expect to see in the near future?
I know that the Corteva, I did text the Corteva sales rep just an hour ago, and she said that Mesaview has been labeled or registered with Tim City Park the Bag. So it has been registered. I don't know how widely available it is, and given some of the delays in shipments and backlog of shipments due to COVID, I don't know availability on the shelf at this point in time. But I would fully expect both of those to be on the shelf under normal conditions. I'll say, Scott, I would expect that those products to be on the shelf by use season this year.
Okay, a couple other things that I'd like to point out. You'd mentioned, and I liked your picture there of where you was doing the calibration. You was testing that out there on some dry gravel and stuff. And from our angle in that picture, it looked like sort of like my dad's sprayer. We did a calibration on it this past year, and one side, it might have went 8 feet, And then you looked at the other side and you had 20 feet. And that was just the way the nozzle was set up and everything. And so it was, when we had the GPS unit then set up behind that, if we did that if we said that was going to be 28 feet, then we was expecting that thing to go 14 on each side. And, it didn't necessarily fall that way. So we streaked some stuff as well. So I think is a lot of user, we got to learn the systems and how to plug all that stuff in.
Exactly. I think if you grew up playing video games, that stuff comes natural, but those guidance systems are a little bit tricky.
They sure are. They sure are. I would encourage everyone to, consider calibrating their equipment and stuff this year. We do have, they're out now, those 2022 weed control manuals. I don't know about production. It seems like they shipped us about half of what we typically get in the counties and stuff. But if that's a publication that you're familiar with, you need to try to get out to your extension office and try to get you one of those. It has all of Tennessee's recommendations in there on specific weeds and what the rate and stuff that's recommended for those. It also has in the back section on calibration. And so it's a great publication. I encourage you to check that out. Mr. Bankley or any of the other agents that are on board, do y'all have anything to add?
I don't, Scott. Good presentation.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Bryd. We certainly appreciate you being on board with us tonight. I thought about popping the question and, asking if anybody had any specific weeds that were problematic and stuff on the farm and stuff, but we might be here all night if we did that. So, if you got any specific weeds, I'd encourage you to reach out to your local agent, extension agent there, and they would hopefully be able to work with you on a control recommendation and stuff for each of those specific plants. I think you mentioned number one was identification. That's how you got to be able to identify that weed, know what you're targeting before you start working on a control recommendation. And so certainly appreciate everybody being on board tonight. This is recorded. If you'd like to go back and watch this later, just remind you before we leave that our next webinar will be April 12th. Now it's set up so when you go to register, you can register for all of those following events. And next one will be April 12th about summer forages. We got R.L. Dalrymple. He'll be, of course, talking about crabgrass. And then Dr. Dillard from Auburn University will be talking about a lot of the other summer weeds as well. Nobody has anything to add on that. I'll close it out tonight. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you at one of these webinars in the future. Dr. Bryd, are you still on board with us?
Believe he shagged there, Coach.
I think he has. We had a question here from William Cooper that came on the chat, best herbicide for backpack applications for fence row that would not harm trees. And so I'm assuming that William's probably thinking of a broadcast spray or something, not specifically targeting, like hack and squirt or anything like that. He's wanting to spray something directly that's going to take out everything there. William, you still on board? I think we lost William as well. So thank you so much.